Hi, and welcome to a special failure-oriented episode of InstaVision. Well, InstaVision, like jazz, always succeeds, but there is an upside to failure, too. And in fact, our next guest, Megan McArdle, has written about that. She's a pioneering blogger, she's a columnist for Bloomberg View, and she's the author of The Upside of Down, Why Failing Well is the Key to Success. Thanks for joining us, Megan.
Thanks for having me. I was glad to be back with a fellow pioneer.
So why is failing important for getting ahead?
Well, because failure forces, there's actually a couple of reasons. One of the best reasons is that failure forces us to let go of things that weren't working. So, for example, when I was in 2001, I graduated from business school and I thought I was going to be a management consultant, but that job disappeared when they laid off my whole associate class before we ever started. As a result, while working down at the World Trade Center, I started a blog. And next thing you know, I was a professional journalist writing about economics and public policy. And since 2007, I've gotten to write a blog full time, which is like the most amazing dream job ever, as I'm sure you can attest. But if I hadn't lost that job, I would never have dared to go out and do something that, when I took my first job in journalism, paid a third of what I'd been expecting to make as a management consultant, especially since I had $100,000 in student loans to pay off. So failure enables us to take risks that we wouldn't have dreamed of taking if we hadn't had the safer but perhaps less pleasant alternative cleared away.
Yeah, it's funny. I know the story of Jeff Bezos, who was working, I think it's in investment banking, when he came up with the idea for Amazon, and he was telling somebody about his plan, and they said, that's a good business plan. It would be a great business plan for somebody who weren't already making $375,000 a year. But I guess you're right. If you're Jeff Bezos, maybe you go on anyway, but for most people, a swift kick in the ass is necessary sometimes to move them out of their comfort zone and into something different.
Well, if you look at my own company, Bloomberg, Mike Bloomberg started the company when he was let go from Salomon Brothers, and he took his millions of dollars of severance, and he turned that into one of the most lucrative global media and technology companies in the world.
Yeah. Do you think American society has gotten too unforgiving of failure, or maybe not too unforgiving, but too unwilling to risk failure?
I think there's a little bit of both. I mean, to start with, you've talked about this a lot, the relentless credentialing mechanism where we try to guarantee people a good job by pushing an ever larger number of students through college. Well, I mean, it's bad in two ways. The elites now, to get the GPAs they need to get into a top college, are getting more and more risk averse. But for poor kids, it's harder and harder to vault that high level required to get into a selective school. So we've got a system that's not great for elites, not great for poor kids. It's really good for college administrators. And more generally, when you look at the numbers, you see that entrepreneurs, we're getting less of them. You see that people are quitting their jobs less often. We're clinging to what we have instead of striking out for the frontier.
So you had a really sad post about how 15-year-old kids are afraid to take chances in tough classes in high school because it might hurt their GPA and their chance of getting into the right college. Do you think that's a real problem? Because I kind of do.
I think that is a huge problem. I mean, I talked to my parents about this actually, and my parents said, we made a very conscious decision to let you screw up in high school because when was there going to be a better time, right? You're still living at home. You don't have a mortgage to make. That is the time when you should be learning to take the most risks and learning to fail, frankly, because that is a skill. Learning to do something you're not necessarily super great at already and overcome the challenges, that's probably the most important skill that you're going to carry into life and into the workplace. So we should be encouraging kids to go out and try something difficult and new rather than trying something they already know they can get an A in.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's been my philosophy of parenting too. But as you say in your book, it's rational for people to engage in what you call wiffle parenting because selective schools are more selective. But it's bad for America. And, I always say systems where it's rational for individuals to do things that are harmful for society are dysfunctional systems. Do you think we're dysfunctional that way?
I think the educational system is incredibly dysfunctional. I don't think that'll come as any surprise to you, of all people. With the way that the whole system works, we're spending more and more money. When I went to business school, the career people said, frankly, We could put you guys on a cruise ship for 2 years and you would still get jobs because getting into Chicago is the big hurdle. And that's a terrible way to look at education. It's like a phenomenal waste of resources to have people spend hundreds of thousands of dollars and years of their lives just trying to prove that they can get into and get out of the school that they're in.
Yeah, maybe I should start a school at heart and just make it a cruise, and be a good marketing technique. Well, Peter Thiel once told me that he thought that. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say there's an argument that that's what some of these schools are doing, right, with the climbing walls and the hot tubs.
That's right. Well, Peter Thiel once told me that he thought the whole higher education bubble thing really comes out of fear. That is, parents fear that their kids might fall out of the middle class, or the upper middle class anyway, leading them to basically sort of try to buy insurance in the form of elite credentials for their kids. Do you think our unwillingness to allow failure is really a sign of sort of shrinking horizons and increased fear in general?
Yes, absolutely. We're treating the economy as a zero-sum game where there's a limited supply of good jobs to be got, and the purpose of education is to ensure that your children secure one of those slots. And any economist will tell you that's a terrible way to think about the economy, both because it's not true and because that is going to inhibit you from creating the extra growth. It's going to create more good jobs for all sorts of people, college graduates or not.
I think that's right. What do you think people should do?
Well, I mean, I think that this has to start with employers and with college administrators, because it is true that the parents are responding rationally. The employers and the college administrators have to stop demanding these ridiculous levels of credentials where we're looking for a 4.0 GPA rather than a creative kid who's been daring greatly, as Theodore Roosevelt once said. But parents have a role too. Think about training your kids not with the sort of form-filling ability that they're going to need in order to get that 4.0 and the prestigious school admission, but instead training them with the grit and the resilience that they're going to need to actually go out into the economy and, as Dave Ramsey says, kill something and drag it home.
I mean, I think that's right. And I think that one of the encouraging things I see sort of in the employment field in particular is a focus on certifications of actual abilities as opposed to credentials for time served. And I hope we'll see more movement in that direction. I know there's even some action in Congress from Mike Lee and Marco Rubio and some of the people to try to sort of help push that along. But I think it's kind of an organic trend because college is just so expensive and it's such a huge investment that it's in the interest of both students and their future employers to find a cheaper way to do it.
No, I think that's absolutely right. And I think you actually are starting to see a little bit of the pushback on the idea that we just keep spending more and more money on credentials. You're starting to see in the law school market that third-tier schools, people don't want to go there because they're not a great place to get a job anymore. And I think that we're going to see that in higher education as a whole more, where people are going to demand value rather than a piece of paper that entitles them to a job.
Well, let's hope so. Exit question. Are you optimistic or pessimistic overall that this is going to get better over the next decade or two?
I'm still bullish on America. I think we have so many talents in terms of, we still are, when you look at the rest of the world, we still do take more risks. We still are better at handling failure, at restoring people who have made some mistakes back to the labor market, back to society. Not in all ways, but in a whole lot. And so I think that ultimately we still have the talents that we need to make this transition. The main thing to do is identify the problem and get serious about addressing it.
Well, thanks so much for helping us identify the problem, and we'll try to get serious.
Thanks so much for talking to me.
And that was Megan McArdle. She's a pioneering blogger. She writes for Bloomberg View, and her new book, which I highly recommend, is The Upside of Down: Why Failing Well is the Key to Success. We hope we succeeded here this week at InstaVision. We'll be back next week with hopefully more success. In the meantime, have fun on the internet. Thanks.